Jimmy Kimmel steps onto the stage with his usual swagger, greeted by thunderous applause from his late-night audience. Dressed in a sleek suit and armed with a sly grin, he wastes no time diving into his opening monologue. The spotlight casts a confident glow on him as he begins tossing out punchlines, targeting celebrities, politicians, and pop culture icons. But then, with a smirk and a subtle eye roll, he sets his sights on someone new, Sylvester Stallone. "You know, I watched Rambo the other night," Jimmy quips. "And I realized something. Stallone has basically made an entire career out of grunting, sweating, and shooting at things that don't shoot back." The crowd chuckles, feeding off his sarcasm. Jimmy paces the stage, throwing up mock punches in the air. "I mean, don't get me wrong, I loved Rocky. But how many inspirational training montages does one guy need to fight the same Russian 10 times?" The audience erupts in laughter. He continues, pretending to stagger in slow motion, slurring his voice to mimic Stallone's iconic tone. "Yo, Adrian, I can't read the script but I can definitely punch this meat in a freezer." More laughter. The camera pans across the audience, capturing their amusement. Kimmel leans in closer to the camera. At this point, if Stallone starred in The Fast and the Furious, it would have to be called The Slow and the Wheezy. The crowd loses it, clapping and hooting. Backstage, a monitor glows. Sylvester Stallone watches in silence, his massive arms folded across his chest. His expression is unreadable, somewhere between disbelief and steel-cold calm. No movement. Just the stillness of a man who has endured more than just verbal punches. Jimmy, unaware of Stallone's presence, keeps going. "Seriously, folks, Stallone's scriptwriting process probably involves punching a typewriter until a screenplay falls out." Another wave of laughter crashes through the room. But something in the air begins to shift. The laughter fades just a bit too quickly. Jimmy's rhythm falters for a moment. Maybe it's the sense that the joke went too far, or maybe it's the sudden awareness that sometimes, legends don't laugh with you, they walk through the curtain behind you. And they don't need a spotlight to command the room. The moment Jimmy cracks his final joke, the studio lights flicker just slightly, almost imperceptibly. The audience's laughter softens as a presence begins to form at the edge of the stage. Without any fanfare, no music, no dramatic entrance, Sylvester Stallone strides out from behind the curtain. The crowd erupts in disbelief. Cheers thunder through the room, a standing ovation begins to rise, and Jimmy Kimmel freezes mid-sentence, his smile suddenly tight. Stallone walks slowly but with unmistakable confidence, dressed in a simple black jacket, his jaw clenched, eyes locked on Jimmy like a fighter stepping into the ring. No grin, no nod. Just complete silence from him as he takes the stage. Jimmy stumbles for words, holding his microphone tighter than usual. "Well, ladies and gentlemen," he says, chuckling nervously, "look who it is. The Italian stallion himself. I didn't know you were." He stops. Stallone steps forward, picks up a spare mic from the host's desk, and lifts it calmly. The crowd quiets. All eyes now on him. Stallone turns to Jimmy, his voice low, slow, and deliberate. "You talk tough for a guy who's never been hit," he says. A wave of tension floods the room. Gasps escape the crowd like air from a balloon. Jimmy blinks rapidly, shifting in place. He tries to lighten the mood, chuckling again, "Come on, Sly, it's all in good fun. I'm a huge fan." But Stallone doesn't laugh. He doesn't even blink. Instead, he tilts his head, still holding Jimmy in his gaze. "There's a difference between making fun and being funny," he says. "One of them builds people up. The other tears down things you don't understand." Jimmy's hand tightens around his cue cards. He attempts a comeback, something witty, something to regain control, but nothing comes. The studio audience is now frozen in rapt silence, watching this unexpected showdown unfold in real time. Stallone's presence is overpowering, Not loud or aggressive, but firm, intense, and undeniable. You know, he continues, I wrote Rocky with nothing but a dream and no place to sleep. People laughed at me too. But I didn't need to laugh back. I let my work speak. Jimmy looks around, searching for some way to flip the energy, to joke his way out of the shadow that's just been cast over him. But Stallone has already made his move. Not with fists, not with rage, but with a quiet, commanding truth that leaves no room for mockery. The audience begins to shift again, not toward laughter, but admiration. Not for the host, but for the man who just took over the room without ever raising his voice. Sylvester Stallone takes a slow step forward, his eyes scanning the audience before landing squarely back on Jimmy. He doesn't raise his voice, doesn't rush his words. Instead, he begins to speak with a grounded calm that fills the room more powerfully than any punchline ever could. There was a time, Stallone says, when I had nothing. No job, no food. I had to sell my dog for $50 just to eat. The audience leans in, hushed, fully captivated. Jimmy shifts in his seat, unsure whether to interrupt or let it ride. But Stallone doesn't give him a window. He continues, people told me I'd never make it. That my voice was too weird. That my face didn't fit the screen. I didn't laugh at that. I lived through it. There's no bravado in his tone. Just raw, unshakable truth. I wrote Rocky in 3 days, Stallone says, glancing briefly toward the studio lights. 3 days. In a little apartment with no heat, no phone, and a typewriter that barely worked. Jimmy tries to interject with a smile, that's amazing, man. Seriously. But Stallone's expression doesn't change. He keeps going, undeterred. I was offered $100,000 for that script. But they wanted someone else to play the lead. A real star, not me. A pause. I turned it down. Because if I was gonna fail, I was gonna fail being myself. A ripple of applause starts in the audience, tentative but growing. Stallone doesn't acknowledge it. His focus stays locked on Jimmy. You stand here and make jokes like pain is a costume. Like struggle is just a story to laugh at. But pain built my name. Every scar, every rejection, that's why people know who I am. That's why they remember me. Jimmy tries to recover, grinning through the tension. Well, I guess I should be writing more movies in 3 days then, huh? He says, chuckling weakly. Stallone doesn't bite. You don't build a legacy by talking. You build it by surviving. The air in the studio turns electric. Not with energy, but with reverence. The audience is no longer laughing. They're watching a man speak not to entertain, but to remind. You built your career out of punchlines, Stallone says softly. I built mine out of punches. That line lands like a knockout. The audience gasps again, this time louder. Jimmy's mouth opens slightly but no words come. Stallone nods once, just enough to signify he's finished saying what needed to be said. And for a brief, stunning moment, Jimmy Kimmel, the king of the late-night mic, has nothing left to say. Jimmy, desperate to take back control of his stage, gestures toward the screen behind him. Okay, he laughs nervously. Let's bring up the teleprompter before Rocky here turns this into another sequel. A few laughs flicker from the audience, more out of habit than joy. The teleprompter flashes on with a pre-written jab. Something about Stallone needing subtitles in his own movies. Jimmy tries to deliver it, but Stallone cuts in before the words even leave his mouth. Don't, he says, voice calm but firm. You can read jokes. I lived them. The words slam into the room like a sledgehammer. The audience is stunned. Some people lower their phones, realizing they're not watching comedy anymore. They're watching something real. Stallone takes another step forward, his presence now completely overshadowing Jimmy. He looks toward the audience, not to entertain, but to connect. Then, with a pause, he recites the words that have become his legend. It's not about how hard you hit, he says, letting each word settle. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. The crowd starts clapping, louder and louder. Some are even standing. Jimmy looks around, suddenly a guest on his own show. The applause isn't for him anymore. It belongs to a man who turned pain into purpose, rejection into resolve. And that's how winning is done, Stallone adds, finishing the quote like he's lived it 1,000 times. Because he has. Jimmy tries to stay composed, clutching his cards, smiling through the storm, but the difference is obvious. This isn't a roast. This is a reminder that strength isn't volume, it's resilience. That success isn't a stage. It's survival. The cameras catch glimpses of the audience nodding, whispering to each other, visibly moved. Stallone doesn't smirk. He doesn't pose. He just stands there, a living statue carved out of grit. Jimmy tries one last time to jump in. Well, Sylvester, maybe I should have brought some gloves tonight, huh? He chuckles, but no one laughs. The words fall flat. The moment has shifted too far. Stallone turns his gaze back to him, not with anger, but with certainty. Comedy's a good thing, he says, but respect, that's better. The applause rises again, spontaneous and heartfelt, as Stallone slowly lowers the mic. Jimmy sets his cards down, letting out a quiet sigh. He knows, and everyone in the room knows, this wasn't a guest segment. This was a masterclass in humility, delivered by a man who didn't need to punch to leave a mark. As the final echoes of applause fade, Stallone gives a subtle nod to the audience, then turns to walk off stage, not with triumph, but quiet dignity. Every step feels like punctuation to a moment that won't be forgotten. Jimmy stands frozen, his usual bravado nowhere in sight. The cameras stay locked on him, expecting a final quip, a graceful exit from the verbal bout. But none comes. He looks down, adjusts his tie, and exhales slowly, a half smile on his lips, not one of sarcasm, but of reluctant respect. Ladies and gentlemen, he says quietly, give it up again, for the real heavyweight. The crowd erupts, this time not in laughter, but admiration. Stallone doesn't turn around, doesn't bask in it. He disappears behind the curtain the same way he entered, without needing to announce a thing. The studio lights dim slightly as Jimmy tries to transition back to his script, but the rhythm of the night is permanently altered. Every joke that follows feels like filler, every smile feels a little rehearsed. Stallone's presence lingers like smoke in the air, heavy, unshakable. Backstage, staff and crew exchange looks, some nodding silently, others stunned by what they just witnessed. The control room cuts back to Jimmy, hoping he can recover the show's tone. He tries. Coming up next, we've got a magician who claims he can make time disappear. Kinda like what happened to my confidence tonight. The crowd chuckles, some louder than before, warming to his self-awareness. But even that moment, honest and vulnerable, is shaped by what came before it. Jimmy learns something in front of millions, in real time. That being clever is great. Being funny is powerful. But being real, that's unforgettable. Later that night, as the episode trends online, it's not the jokes people quote, it's Stallone's quiet takedown, his dignity, his truth. Clips go viral. Headlines read, Stallone teaches Kimmel a lesson without raising his voice. Comment sections fill with applause emojis and words like, goosebumps, legend, and respect. And somewhere in his dressing room, Jimmy watches it all back on his phone. He nods slowly, a wry grin forming as he mumbles, yeah, that's how winning is done. For once, it's not a punchline. It's a realization. Stallone didn't humiliate him. He elevated the moment. And sometimes, losing the stage is the only way to understand its worth.